So with that, I transition us to our question and answer portion. Would love to hear from you. So if you have a question, please drop it into the chat and they will be moderated by our wonderful Mrs. Seves once we receive them.
All right, so our first question here is from Mr. Pryor, who asks, how do I get a yard sign?
You can reach out to Mr. Pryor and get a yard sign, or you can reach out to me and we will at Robert F. Smith at gpsk12.org and we will get one to you. So Mr. Pryor is the first line of defense. It's the yard sign man. And we have posts for you to put your signs on. So there's that.
All right, and then I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Mr. Fashaw asks, what does your ideal staff and leadership look like?
That is a wonderful question. Um, because we want to operate with fidelity to the model, the ideal candidate profile would be an HBCU graduate or someone connected in some way to historically Black colleges and universities, passion and experience in STEM fields, in the arts, in business, really a master or expert in their content area, but also in building relationships that bridge what learning is taking place in the classroom to the learning that can impact and affect transformational change in the community. So that's those are the two biggest pieces to me: a love for people, a love for students, a love for learning. Those are the characteristics, just natural leaders that are aligned with what the heart is in the mission and vision. So HBCU grads, STEAM experience and passion, and also a willingness to serve and love our kids well.
All right, and then our next statement slash question says, this is great information. My family is already committed, but is the info on the PowerPoint accessible on the website or somewhere else so I can direct other families to said information?
That is a wonderful question and a beautiful way for us to introduce our YouTube channel. So the Q&A from this evening and previous open houses will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. The same handle as our Instagram and Facebook pages, Robert F. Smith STEAM Academy. So you can share that link with anyone, and we could also get information to you about the Community Warriors Toolkit. If that link can be dropped into the chat, that would be an awesome way for you to support this work. And so general information is contained in that toolkit, and our YouTube channel will be live. So yay.
All right, and then I believe Miss Drinkwater asks, can you explain more about the special needs and gifted and talented program?
Absolutely. So in case there's anyone, I'm going to backtrack a little bit in case there's anyone who's joined and didn't hear that original overview. So math classes and English classes will be co-taught with a special education teacher and a gifted and talented teacher. That co-teaching model will allow for each lesson plan to incorporate the accommodations and modifications needed for special education students or students who are receiving special education services, as well as the extensions for our students who are receiving gifted and talented services. The purpose of having those two classes leveraging that co-teaching model is to ensure that in the content areas where students typically need more support or intentional guidance, they get that. The other piece is to ensure that the identification that students received, either a special education designation or a gifted and talented designation, is appropriate. We know there's disproportionality around Black students and Black boys in particular being identified as having special education needs. And so we want to ensure that there aren't biases that are influencing that designation, and that really is a support students need. So having the real-time interventions built into the lessons, the instructors in the class with the capacity and expertise to ensure that those interventions are given or implemented with fidelity is the heart behind ensuring that if a student is misidentified, that they can transition from receiving special education services to receiving the services that are most appropriate to them. If that did not answer your question, please send a follow-up into the chat.
There is currently one follow-up from that one in the chat that says, how do you determine who is gifted and talented or special needs?
So that process is part of the MTSS process that happens in the classroom. Parents can also say, I have a concern, I'm noticing these things, what supports are offered? And we can begin to respond and develop interventions to see what's the best pathway. If special education services are determined to be needed, that's when we develop an individualized education plan or potentially a 504 plan. But there's some testing, some interventions that are applied, and we progress monitor for a little bit, reevaluate and see if that's the best fit. If that's a process that has or has not already happened for your 8th grade student, then we can talk about that with the 8th grade counselor and figure out what the best transition would be to identify the needs that we should support for your learner.
Okay, and then we have time for one last question tonight, which is from Mr. Griffin, which says, are you sending out information to 8th grade families in the area middle schools, such as Omar D. Blair and others, so that those families are aware of what the Academy has to offer?
Yes and yes. We have sent emails to every leader in the near Northeast and far Northeast that has 8th grade students with our promotional materials. We've also sent out mailers and email blasts to families with 8th grade students. So I've been able to connect with 8th grade families at a few of the schools. So we're working on it, and we are moving full steam ahead with our marketing and recruitment. So if there is information that you would like, again, we will add the Community Warriors link into the chat before we end our time. And so you have access to those promotional materials as well. Well, thank you so much for your questions. If there are any questions that we didn't get to, I ask that you send an email to robertfsmith@dpsk12.org. So we answered questions, we talked through the school model, and you might be wondering like, okay, now what do I do next? There's a few things that can be done. The first is, if you are not already, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can sign up for our newsletter by visiting robertfsmith.dpsk12.org. And you can ask questions or set up a time for one-on-one support with the school choice application before that window closes by emailing robertfsmith@dpsk12.org. And you might say, well, I've done all that. I already follow you all on Facebook and Instagram. I get the newsletter. I've already made the school my number one choice.